So my goal today is uh, to reorganize, or not really reorganize, but to change a little bit the way I change the way I organize this so that we are looking at, you know what? I cannot multitask. So I'm gonna re-share my slides. You guys can look at them on the screen. I will figure out a way to get them shared with you so that you can have them on your own computers and whatnot. I just can't do it while I'm talking. So I'm gonna dive right into this. I called this a spice review. So I'm gonna take the key concepts and look at them through the lens of the themes that the College Board uses, which I like the acronym of SPICE. It's not in the same order as the College Board, but if it spells a word, so it's easy to remember. So we're going to talk through the different themes, and I'm going to show you how these themes link up with the key concepts. And the reason I think this is an important way to study for the AP exam is that I see a lot of questions from the College Board that ask about particular themes, and they often use key concept language. But if you're not familiar with the themes, that can make it really challenging to know how to answer those questions. So I wanted to just try this little different spin on things rather than going chronologically or topic-wise, but really look at it thematically and bring things together. So my slides are going to be pretty basic. I'm going to just have some basic notes for you. And then as we talk, I'm going to ask you to help me out with some of the examples and the different kinds of things. So be really active in the chat if you've got ideas for examples. That's going to be really super awesome stuff. All right, so let's pop in to my first topic. So the S in SPICE is social. And the thing I like to think about when I'm trying to think, okay, is my information a social topic, is the answer to this question. How do people interact with one another? Sometimes when we see that word social, people veer off into political or economic or cultural kinds of things. So if you see a question about social issues, you're thinking about interactions of people. So that could be gender relations, family relations, relationships between classes, whether they are race-based or economically based, or any other structure for cultural-based classes. So for this social theme, we're really thinking about the interactions between people between people and each other. So for this social SPICE theme in Unit 3, we're really thinking about continuities and changes from Unit 2. So continuity-wise, the first big continuity is that social structures were shaped by hierarchies. And this is something that you probably remember going all the way back to Unit 1, that as agriculture develops and as people are settling down in those cities and specializing in different labor, we've got the different class structures that emerge. As those class structures, they change over time, but the basic idea of hierarchies, of stratifying people with one another is, excuse me, is still in place. And I am having just a beast of a time trying to share these slides with you. So I'm going to pause for like 2 seconds because people are still asking, and clearly I'm having difficulties with this. So let's just pop out of that and see if I can get it to share. It was giving me trouble before. Link sharing, advanced. These Google Slides, they're super awesome. But okay. For whatever reason, there's something weird happening with my Google Slides. Yeah, I know. I know how to do link sharing. I do it literally every single day. But for whatever reason, this particular Google slideshow isn't sharing right now. And I don't want to waste your time trying to solve my tech issues. So I'm gonna jump back in to where we were at and figure this out another time, because if I can get it by the end of the if I can get it at the end of the video when we're doing some Q&A, I will try that again. But yeah, I wish I knew what was up, because that is super weird. That's literally never happened before. Okay, awesome. So we're thinking about social classes. That stuff is a continuity. The other big continuity to keep in mind, and this is pretty much a continuity for all of AP World, is we're still thinking about patriarchy. Patriarchy continues. We know that in the vast majority of civilizations around the world, men's work, men's lives are being valued more highly than women's work, women's lives. And that shows up in a bunch of different ways, some of which I'll talk about a little bit more when we get into the culture theme, because the gender stuff, there's definitely some interactions with religion, with politics, with economics there as well. But what we need to remember, broadly speaking, is that our class hierarchies are still in place from previous units, and patriarchy is still in place from previous units. Now the changes, the big social changes in Unit 3 are thinking about the spread of religions, right? That connection between social and cultural spice theme is that gender and family structures change as religions get into new regions. So as our major religions, including Christianity, Buddhism, and Islam, spread throughout Afro-Eurasia, those religions have an impact. So can anybody think of an example of how gender relations might be changed in an area based on one of those three kind of universal religions, Christianity, Buddhism, or Islam? Anybody popping in? So what about Islam and women? So we do see that as Islam spreads out into the Middle East and blends with Persian cultures, we see an increased seclusion of women in Middle Eastern regions. I see also in the chat monasticism, and Christianity and Buddhism both have a monastic tradition. Monastic is monks and nuns, which gives people an alternative to traditional gender and family roles. So people can exempt out of marriage and family standards and devote their lives to spirituality. In Christianity, we do see that the very early church back in Unit 2, women held greater positions of power, but as we get into Unit 3, Christianity has become much more restrictive, and so as it spreads into other areas, women's roles may also become constricted as well. So yeah, as religions spread, they have an impact on gender and family structures. The other big change, though, is that there are exceptions to this. In some regions, we see women exercising power and influence. And the key concepts actually give us a couple of examples of this. Specifically, the Mongols, right? The Mongols are one of our big exceptions to a lot of things. And like many pastoral societies, Mongol women have greater influence, greater power, greater authority than women in most settled civilizations. But we also see similar things in West Africa. Women in West Africa continue to exert power and influence in their civilizations. We see this actually in the writings of some of the Muslim travelers who came into West Africa and were surprised, shocked even, to see what was happening in West Africa, because it was so different from what they were experiencing in North Africa or Europe or the Middle East. So there are a lot of regions where there are exceptions to this idea of patriarchy, exceptions to these restrictions. We actually don't see matriarchal societies during Unit 3. We actually don't see matriarchal societies much at all in world history. We see matrilineal societies, societies in which family lines are descended from mothers. But in terms of political power or rule over a civilization, we actually don't see anybody large enough to be recorded with a strictly matriarchal society. We see much more egalitarian or equal societies in some places, but matriarchy, not so much. All right. So that's the social theme, and the thing of it is, with Unit 3 especially, a lot of the social stuff is continuities from previous units. So if you have an understanding of class structures, patriarchy, those things are largely holding steady. When we get into Unit 4, we're going to see a lot more conversation about race and ethnicity becoming more significant. But for Unit 3, those are our big social things that we need to pay attention to. So I'm going to jump to our next spice theme, which is politics. And politics is about leadership. It's about control. It's about conflict. So government is definitely the big thing to think of when you think about politics, but even like power plays and the ways that people exert power, either within or between civilizations, that could definitely be a place where we're seeing politics in action. So foot binding in China is actually a great example. I see somebody popping that up there in the chat. Foot binding in China would be an example of patriarchy in action here in Unit 3. Song Dynasty China really embraces the practice of foot binding, particularly amongst elite women. And so that would be a new development, but it's part of that ongoing theme of patriarchy. It relates to Confucianism, so you could put it either in your social bucket or your cultural bucket, depending on how you want to discuss it and what the particular question is asking you. So that was an awesome question. Thank you for dropping that into the chat as I talk. But as we're thinking about politics, there's some pretty significant things to keep in mind. Transformations from Unit 2. There's a whole section in the key concepts of some specific transformations that you want to keep an eye on. For example, one of the things you want to keep an eye on is that some of the empires from Unit 2 don't go away entirely. You probably learned about the fall of your classical empires, and that's very accurate. But in some places, the empires that come along in Unit 3 don't look all that much different from the empires that existed in Unit 2. Can you think of some places where an empire either persisted through Unit 2 into Unit 3, or a place where when the empire re-emerged in Unit 3, it had a lot of the same character and flavor as previous units? The Byzantine Empire is a great example of a persisting empire. Yep. In China is a fantastic example. Yep. Our Chinese dynasties carry forward a lot of the traditions built on the Qin and Han dynasties in Unit 2. Persia, we do see empires in Persia, but they're hugely transformed in this unit. So maybe not. Aztecs and Incas are actually going to emerge as Unit 3 empires, but the Mayans carry forward in the Americas from Unit 2 into Unit 3. Yeah, so some of the empires are they're rebuilding themselves, rebranding themselves in some cases. And those are important ideas to keep in mind, because you may be asked a question about empires that are reconstituting or about new political entities that are emerging. And so some of these new entities are empires in new places, but some of them are completely new and different things that we haven't seen in place before. So what are some of the new political entities here in Unit 3? The caliphates, the Islamic caliphates, right? Islam, new religion, a religious governing structure, definitely one of our new political entities. But where else? The Song and Tang dynasties would probably be reconstituted empires. The Mongol Khanates are a new entity. Yep. The feudal systems that we see emerging both in Europe and in Japan, those decentralized, really fragmented states, those are new here in Unit 3. So those are absolutely great examples. The key concepts also mention some of the new Hindu and Buddhist states in Southeast and especially in Southeast Asia. Thinking about some of the trade civilizations in the Indian Ocean, thinking about some of the new city-states in East Africa as well. Yeah, so we're looking at 600 to 1450. The Delhi Sultanate in India would be a new political entity, less unified than the classical Mauryan and Gupta empires, but carrying some of the same cultural ideas into India. So we've got reconstituted empires, we've got new political entities. That was two bullets for the price of one right there with my click. The American empires. One of the things to keep in mind is that this is the unit where our large unified empires in the Americas emerge. The Mayans have emerged at the end of Unit 2. They carry forward into Unit 3. But this is the era when we will see the consolidation of the Inca Empire in the Andes and the Aztec Empire in Mesoamerica, as well as the beginnings of some of the alliance structures and larger civilizations in North America as well. So the American empires are growing. That's a transformation coming out of time period 2. And then there's this note here in the key concepts that says that states blended local and foreign ideas. And I think the reason that, that's just all it says in the key concepts. And I think what the College Board is trying to remind you is that trade is huge. We're going to have more on economics than any other theme for this unit in particular. Trade is a really big deal. And as the trade intensifies and increases, we're going to see civilizations taking their local traditional customs and blending them with the new ideas that they're being exposed to. I'm seeing a question in the chat about the Silk Road and the Indian Ocean. It's part of Unit 2 and Unit 3. So we're going to see those trade networks continuing to be important for a long, long time in world history. Yeah, they began in time period 2. The Silk Roads developed during the time of the Han Dynasty and the Roman empires, beginning to connect people across land in Eurasia. The Indian Ocean network dates back to, boats practically, coastal trade and the use of the monsoons definitely by time period 2. And yes, the word that the College Board loves to use for time period 3 is intensify. There was more trade, there were more people trading, there were more regions involved, all of that. So the Swahili city-states are a place where the blend of local and foreign ideas was true. But it's actually true just about anywhere that's connected to any trade network. And so we would want to keep that in mind as we're thinking about examples to go along with it. So we will jump into the trade stuff when we get to the economics piece. So remind me of some of those trade questions when we get there. Migrations, we're going to dive into with interactions between humans and the environment. So for politics, we're really thinking about government structures and those kinds of things. And there's some important things about governments and trade. If trade is a really big deal in this unit, we want to think about how does the government get involved with trade. And one of the ways that the government gets involved with trade is that states or governments actually sponsor traders. They sponsor merchants, they sponsor the growth in agriculture. For example, the Inca in the Americas, yep, Catherine was right there with me. The Inca built roads. The government paid for the construction of roads in order to allow for safe trade and travel throughout that empire. We also see the Song Chinese building and expanding the Grand Canal in China to make sure that trade could get through the empire along that canal. So those kinds of things. Taxes and tribute systems are also a big function of what governments are doing. The Mongols are protecting the Silk Road. Yep, that's not necessarily state-sponsored growth, but that's definitely state involvement in trade for sure. And as empires expanded, they increase trade and interactions, right? So if we think about the Mongols as a great example, protecting the Silk Roads, but also as the Mongols expand and conquer more and more territory within Eurasia, and they consolidate that territory, they make it safer for people to travel. We start seeing people from Western Europe, which was not conquered by the Mongols, able to travel safely along the Silk Roads. And so that's how we get Marco Polo hanging out in China. Yeah. So Dylan's asking about guilds like the Hanseatic League in Northern Europe. It's a government-sponsored, that's government-sponsored infrastructure, government-sponsored growth, ways that governments are investing in trade in order to enrich the nation as a whole, in order to get more taxes, really, is what it boils down to. They want the taxes, and so they're going to invest in the people who are making lots of money in order to get some of that money coming back into their coffers. So yeah, we've got new governments emerging. We've got reconstituted empires. We've got blending happening as people are interacting with one another, and governments are paying for some of it. State-sponsored growth in the Inca Empire. So the example of that would be the Inca road networks, because it's more infrastructure than growth, but the creation of those roads led to economic growth within that empire. So that's what that's talking about. So we had social, the interactions of people within a government. We have political, how do people lead? How do they control? How do they fight? Conquest, expansion of empires, those kinds of things are also included in this. Our next theme is interactions between humans and the environment. And it's an I for interactions rather than an E because it spells spice and it helps me out. And two E's would just be too confusing. But really, this isn't about humans interacting with each other. This is about humans interacting with the world around them. So this is the kind of catch-all theme that includes a lot of different stuff. It includes technology. It includes migrations. It includes population trends. And it also includes straight up environmental stuff. So this is kind of a lumpy, weird theme, but I tried to organize the notes as best I could. So, so track with me if we can. All right, so the fate of cities. One of the big themes in this unit is about cities. And some of the cities decline and some of the cities grow. So we need to think about the factors that contribute to each of these things. So thinking about urban decline, what would be some of the factors that lead cities to crumble or collapse? I'm seeing disease, in the plague, invasions, conquests. Absolutely. So, and again, this is going to be regionally specific. Those Mongols, that's right, Catherine. This is going to be regionally specific. In some areas, the cities decline because people get invaded and the cities get destroyed. In some places, right, Western Europe, cities are declining because a third of the population dies from the plague, and it's worst in the cities where people are so tightly concentrated. So that's kind of the environmental piece of this. But we also have issues about agricultural productivity, right? In areas where crops aren't growing super well, we're going to see those cities dwindling and declining versus places where cities are growing or reviving. So what are the things that lead to urban revival, the growth of, or the kind of reinvigoration of cities? Increase of trade, absolutely. Yep. Yes, sometimes conquest can lead to urban revival as they get incorporated into these new larger empires, and it could potentially help a lot. Yep, what else? Columbian Exchange is Unit 4. So remember, Columbian Exchange is named after Columbus. So we don't want to think about the Columbian Exchange until after 1492. Migrations, right? Areas where people are moving into cities. Yep. Not as huge in this unit as in some later units. Unit 5 is going to have huge urban revival and urban growth because of migrations. Agriculture productivity, I'm seeing the 3-field system, which is specific to European agriculture, but increased agriculture means increased population, which means more people could be living in those cities and making money from all that good stuff. New technologies, Yep, absolutely. So we want to think about cities. It's also a good idea to know the names of a handful of cities from Unit 3. Most of these are going to be our big trade centers. So name for me some of the big trade cities from Unit 3, from some of these empires. Baghdad, Timbuktu, Venice, that's a great one in the Italian city-states. Constantinople, absolutely. Mecca is a regional trade hub, but it's pretty far off of the major trade networks to be a super global trade hub. Whoa, look at all these cities popping in. You guys are awesome. You must have your Princeton reviews open right now, which is fantastic. I love that. I'm seeing Malacca and Aden and Zanzibar. We could call the Swahili city-states as a group. Yep, absolutely. Chang'an in China. Yep, fantastic. These are great. All right, another big theme as we think about interactions between humans and the environment is the actual environment. And global warming is a factor in Unit 3, not global warming in the 21st century sense, but in the climate got warmer between about 800 CE and 1300 CE. So it's the opposite of the Little Ice Age, Catherine. Little Ice Age is going to pop in Unit 4, but we have this warming trend, which allows for the increase in agriculture. It allows for the increase in population. So some of that urban revival is also related to just a straight up environmental piece. It doesn't have a good name like Little Ice Age. I like Little Warm Age, but that's, there's not a good name for it. It's just a thing that happened. That's good to know. This one, I don't have a better way to put this note, but humans continued to adapt. And this is where we want to think about things like technology, so adaptations to specific environments. So what are some either agricultural or technological adaptations that humans might have benefited from in this unit? Knowledge of the monsoons, yet lateen sails for trade, the compass. Other adaptations, right? We think about terracing in China and in the Andes. Viking ships, yep, the Vikings are making all of their raids because of their longboats. Qanats and the spread of irrigation technology. Yep. The Chinampas in the Aztec Empire. Terracing, going back for you, is basically taking a hill and carving flat land into the side of a hill. If you Google terracing and hit Google Images, you'll see just a ton of examples of exactly what this looks like. And it's specifically important for folks living in really mountainous climates, which actually includes a lot of China. A lot of China is pretty mountainous. And in order to sustain this massive population, they needed to convert mountains into farmland. Yeah, absolutely. And I am just popping in to check on a couple of questions people are asking. I see a question about technology in China. I think maybe you meant junks rather than zonks. Yes, those are the large ships from China. That would be a piece of technology that humans are using in the Indian Ocean to move around and get things done. So absolutely, yep. All right. Comparing and contrasting the Incas and Aztecs. So I got a question here about asking us to compare and contrast the Incas and Aztecs. Doesn't really fit with the structure that I'm going with today. So as you're thinking about the Aztecs and Incas, right, you could think about these different spice themes. What do you know about Aztec and Inca social structure? What do you know about their political structure? Their particular environments would be really significant. The Inca environment is dramatically different from the Aztec environment, and that would be a great piece of compare and contrast as you're thinking back over those notes. So I'm not going to do the comparison for you, just in order to make sure that we can move through the rest of the spice themes. But that's definitely something as you're studying your notes, using these themes is a great way to know how to compare some of these different civilizations. All right. Oh, got a question on this theme. What are chinampas? These are the floating gardens built by the Aztecs. So it was an environmental adaptation. They had a lot of swampland that wasn't good for the kind of farming that became common in Afro-Eurasia. And so it was a new type of farming that allowed the Aztecs to grow crops in the regions where they lived and to sustain a growing population. So yeah, chinampas. All right, let's keep it rolling with some more interactions between humans and the environments. Spread of crops, diseases, etc. Everybody knows the plague is a big deal for Unit 3, right? We know we've got the spread of the plague out of Central Asia, both into China and into the Middle East and Europe, along the trade networks that had been so carefully protected by the Mongols. The merchants then wind up spreading disease. The Mongols themselves also spread disease, for sure, in many cases on purpose as a form of biological warfare. But it's not just diseases that spread. We also want to think about crops, right? We think about the champa rice coming out of Southeast Asia and revolutionizing China in this time period. We want to think about technologies that are spreading and if helping humans to adapt and go wherever they needed to be. So thinking about the Muslims, and as Islam creates this interconnected web in the Middle East, North Africa, and parts of Europe, we start to see technology and crops and foods moving throughout that region. You sometimes hear it referred to as the Muslim agricultural revolution. So as you're thinking about, right, trade goods spreading along trade networks and the impacts those have environmentally, crops and diseases are examples that you might want to think about as well. And then, yeah, technology. We want to be thinking about technology that helps humans adapt, thrive, trade, etc. All of this is stuff that fits into this theme. So if you're seeing a question about technology, you might think about how does technology relate to other spice themes. If you're seeing questions about population, those population things are going to be, connected to the environment, connected to trade, connected to politics. So this is one of those themes that really blends into a lot of the other themes. The only times that we tend to see questions on this theme that are just about this theme is when they're specifically environmental questions. But otherwise, this is the theme that kind of connects together a lot of other stuff. All right, I want to get us through this before my voice gives out or some of you, really need to go to bed. So let's pop into our next theme, which is culture. Culture is another one of those themes that people get tripped up on. People often mix up social and culture. So if social was about the interactions of people with one another, culture is about how people express what they believe, what they value, or who they are, what their identity is. So as we dive into culture, we want to think about not just what beliefs do people have, but the expression of those beliefs. And so, of course, one of the things we have to think about in terms of culture is religion. Always thinking about religion for this culture topic. And for Unit 3, the big religious change we have to pay attention to is the rise of Islam. Now, in terms of what do you need to know about Islam, right, knowing a little bit about the beliefs of Islam, knowing the 5 pillars is a really good idea, but it's not just like with all of our study of the other religious traditions, we don't have to know everything about all of the beliefs of any of these religions. We need to know basic beliefs, and we need to know the impact that these religions had on different parts of the world. So we want to remember where religion or where Islam emerged from. So thinking about the Middle East, thinking specifically about the Arabian Peninsula and what we know about the culture of that region, we want to acknowledge that the beliefs of Islam draw on a tradition that comes out of Judaism and Christianity, but adds to it a new set of revelations. So it's one of the reasons why, while there is some similarity between the three traditions, the people, the members of these religious traditions don't always get along with one another because the places where they do diverge are really significant. And so for Islam, it's this blend of local religious traditions, specific revelations, and the Jewish and Christian tradition that had percolated into the Middle East from the Mediterranean basin. But then with Islam, we want to think about also, how does it spread? What impact does it have on the places where it touches? And I'm seeing a lot of good details about Islam happening in the chat. So you guys clearly have read this section or learned this section in your classes. And I just want to remind you that it's an important one because it's new in this unit. So we want to pay attention to it. We also, though, kind of more broadly, thinking about our major religious traditions and how, because of trade, which we'll get to in the next theme, I promise, major religions spread to new places. So we've got Buddhism, which emerges out of Unit 2, but it spreads widely in Unit 3. We've got Hinduism, which spreads in this unit. Confucianism is going to spread in this unit. Christianity is going to spread in this unit as well. I am going to just pop in the questions and see a little bit of what we've got. Catherine, I'm seeing your question about Sufis. Sufis are Muslim mystics. And so their particular practice of Islam is more emotional is not the right word. I have a hard time describing mysticism in words, but it's a particular kind of flavor of Islam that winds up being really popular in places like India and Southeast Asia, probably because it's more spiritual in nature. And so it was more similar to the practices that people had already been exposed to from other traditions. And so it was easy to adapt to Islam because it felt emotionally more like what they were used to. Catherine's question also asks about missionaries. And we got to remember that all varieties of Islam do rely on many of the same tools as our universal religions. So missionaries, yes, people whose job is to spread their religion. Merchants and trade relationships that were beneficial if you converted to a particular religion, and militaries. And so definitely conquest is a big deal about the spread of Islam, especially in North Africa and the Middle East. The merchants and the missionaries were more effective in the Indian Ocean basin, where folks like the Sufis were a little bit more popular. Whoa, we got a whole, so how did Islam spread? I think I hit that a little bit just in my last question, thinking about conquest, right? Militaries, merchants, people saw benefit in being the same religion as the people they were trading with. And so as merchants would go different places, people would convert. And then some missionaries. There were folks who went to spread Islam to different parts of the world. Zoroastrianism is a tradition that comes out of the out of Persia itself. Zoroastrianism still exists in Unit 3, but it's not one of the majorly spread traditions. People were Zoroastrian, but typically in a limited area, and it didn't widely spread. And then Marcus is asking, where does Christianity spread to? Christianity is continuing to spread into many of the same places where it had been spreading in Unit 2. So it's come out of the Mediterranean basin. It's spread throughout Western Europe. It's going to continue to progress northward. The Vikings, for example, are going to convert to Christianity. by the 9th century. Christianity is going to spread in a big way into Eastern Europe and into Russia in the early part of this unit. So Byzantine flavored Christianity is going to wind up in Eastern Europe. Christianity will also continue to spread into Asia. It's going to get slowed down when it hits parts of the world where Islam and Buddhism and Confucianism are a really big deal, but it will continue to spread into some of those areas. Not as much into places like Africa or India. Again, because it runs into already established traditions that don't necessarily blend well together with Christianity. Yeah, and again, there's a bunch of maps out there that I'm sure you could Google and find. Didn't have time to pull up a bunch into my slides, and clearly I'm having tech issues. So I will let you do that Googling on your own. All right, let's see what else we've got on here. So in addition to religion though, culture includes some other stuff. So as we're thinking in this unit, we want to think about the fact that as people are traveling to new regions, they are sending back home their experiences and their writings. And so this is the unit in which we want to pay careful attention to some of our travelers. Our boy Ibn, that's right, Ibn Battuta. We're going to see Marco Polo. We're going to see, there's a lot of them. Those are probably the two most famous, especially if you are a Robert Strayer textbook reader from Ways of the World. But there's a whole lot, especially in the Islamic world, a lot of travelers. And the significance of these travelers is that they, that they brought knowledge of other places back home. But with it, they also brought their own biases. So if in your classes, if you've read anything about or any writings from Ibn Battuta or Marco Polo, you can see that bias in their writings, right? They're looking at these new parts of the world through the lens of their homelands. And so we always want to keep that limitation in mind whenever we're looking at a primary source, right? Where do these guys come from? Where are they going to? And what are they knowing or not knowing about the place where they're going? But that becomes important because it sparks the imagination of people back home and then further intensifies that trade and that spread of culture. And then 3 vocab terms for culture that are a really big deal before I dive into economics, which is going to tie all of this stuff together. The first is diffusion. Diffusion is a term that you may be familiar with from some of your science classes, right? In science, diffusion is the spread of something from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. And that's exactly what it is in a cultural sense as well, that when people from an area of high concentration go to a new area, they bring their culture with them and it gradually spreads to those new places. So language diffuses. Arabic is going to diffuse throughout the Islamic world because you're supposed to read the Quran in Arabic. Chinese is going to spread throughout all of the places where China has an influence. And so we see writing systems based on Chinese characters because that diffusion has happened. Artistic styles are going to diffuse throughout different places. Technologies are going to diffuse throughout different places. All of these different things. So thinking, okay, what's the stuff that's been created? Where has it been created? And where is it going to end up? So this is where our technology piece kind of comes back in, where we see things like norias and qanats. Norias are like big water wheels, and qanats are this super cool irrigation system that was developed in Persia, but then gradually spreads eastward toward Afghanistan. It spreads westward into northern Africa, and it allows deserts to be irrigated. So you can think about that. 2 other vocab terms, and then I'll look at a couple more questions. Diaspora. This is the idea of a community being spread from its homeland, being scattered really from its homeland to other places. And I'm seeing a lot in the chat about the Jewish diaspora, but there's also the idea of a merchant diaspora, that merchants from some of the various regions involved in trade are going to be scattered then and create new homes, new communities, bringing their culture with them, their language, their religion, their art, their expectations of how the world is into these new places. The last term, and this one is critical that you know, and it is syncretism. This is the blending of cultures. So we have diffusion, the spread of cultures, diaspora, the scattering of communities, and they take their culture with them. And then syncretism is the blending of cultures. As religions are adopted, they blend with local traditions to create new ways of practicing a particular religion. We have blending of artistic styles, artistic syncretism, or linguistic syncretism, and these blending of sorts of things. So Swahili is a syncretic language that blends Bantu languages out of sub-Saharan Africa with Arabic to create a trade language in East Africa that was especially useful. Srivijaya in Southeast Asia is a place where syncretism definitely happened, where local traditions were blended with the new traditions of merchants as they came to that region. So the place itself isn't syncretism, but there are examples of syncretism within that particular place. Neo-Confucianism is a great example of syncretism in China, blending traditional Confucianism with Buddhist and Taoist ideas. Sikhism, your textbook is going to tell you that Sikhism is a blend of Hindu and Muslim traditions. We had a guest speaker in my class who came and talked to us about Sikhism and was very clear that Sikhs don't agree with that interpretation. So I'm not saying your textbook is incorrect. I'm saying that the Sikhs that I know resent that particular interpretation. So I want to be a little bit careful with that one. African forms of Islam, though, are a great example of syncretism, blending African traditions, African styles of dress, African views of women, African views of kingship with Islam. Absolutely. So Mansa Musa and his vast wealth wouldn't necessarily be the same as a Muslim king in other parts of the Islamic world, but in West Africa, kings were supposed to display that kind of wealth and power and grandeur like he did. So he represents some elements of syncretism as well. Let me jump in and get to a couple questions. Main religions in Africa at this time. Depends on where in Africa you were. Africa is a huge continent. So in some parts of Africa, especially northern Africa, but also along the coastlines in both West Africa and East Africa, Islam's going to be a really big deal. Christianity in parts of East Africa, Axum and Ethiopia, are going to retain Christianity. There's a form of Christianity in Egypt, Coptic Christianity. That's still a really big deal. And then a lot of indigenous animistic traditions, spirituality, beliefs in nature spirits, not necessarily formalized polytheism, but still pretty significant. So it really depends on where you were in Africa. Somebody's asking about the slides themselves. I could not get them to share. I don't know what happened. They may be available at a later time. I couldn't make it happen, and I apologize for that. Next time I live stream, I will get that figured out for you. I promise. Okay, and a whole bunch of people asking about Sikhism. So Sikhism is it is a religious tradition that comes out of India. It is neither Hindu nor Muslim. I am not Sikh, so I'm going off of just a very little bit of knowledge. Your textbooks often describe it as being a blend of Islam and Hinduism, and that's problematic because Sikhs are monotheistic. They believe in one God, but not the same God as Jews or Christians or Muslims. It's a different idea of God. They believe in the revelations of the gurus who have brought knowledge to the people. So it's an Indian, specifically comes out of India and has, it's a fairly minority tradition, especially in Unit 3, but it grows in significance in later units. And it's not small. You're right, Catherine. It was small in Unit 3, though, is why I'm saying. Okay, I'm going to Maggie just reminded me I only have like 8 minutes. So I'm gonna go as fast as I can with and get us to our economic stuff. The economic stuff is gonna overlap with a lot of this, so I think we'll be able to go fast. But economics, just as a reminder, how do people make money? How do people make stuff? And how do people get other people to do their work for them? That's really what economics are about. So the big word for us with trade is intensification, more trade. With that intensification, existing trade routes got bigger, got wealthier. So the Silk Road trade continues in Unit 3. The Trans-Sahara trade continues in Unit 3. Mediterranean trade continues in Unit 3. Indian Sea Road trade continues in Unit 3. So those existing routes all just grow richer over this whole unit. Cities grow along with trade. Governments need to collect taxes. Merchants need a place to meet. People need a place to live and get services. And so along these trade networks, cities are going bananas. New networks emerge in the Americas, right? As we get bigger empires in the Americas, we get new trade networks. We get a major trade network in the Inca Empire with the Inca road system and the Aztec Pochteka traders along the coast of the Aztec empires. We also see trade along the Mississippi River in North America. And then other big thing about trade as it intensifies, it's still mostly, but not entirely luxury goods. Trade is still really expensive. So most of the goods being traded are things that are going to make people a lot of money. Sea trade is somewhat of an exception to this because you can trade bulk products as well as luxury goods, but silk from China, Catherine, is a great example of a luxury good. Spices are a really great example of luxury goods in the Indian Ocean as well. Basically, if it's something you can only get in one place and you can find somebody who'll buy it in another place where they can't grow it or make it themselves, it's a luxury good. And especially if people don't need it for survival, purple dye, porcelain, those are all fantastic examples of luxury goods. Those are still the backbone of trade in this unit. So the trade itself benefits from a few different things. So technology innovations, the compass is going to come in handy in the Indian Ocean. Caravanserais, locations for people, for traders to stop and rest where they could be protected along the roads if they're in between cities. Those are going to be a big deal. Economic innovations and trade organizations that we already mentioned in the political slide. All of those things are a big deal. But along with those things, we also get some specifically like trade-oriented stuff like paper money. This is the unit where paper money becomes a big deal. So you don't have to carry around giant heavy sacks full of gold or metal coins. So those kinds of things are also a really big deal. We also have things like early forms of credit, not quite credit cards, but we see, right, that loaning of money kinds of things. So those are benefits to economics. Here, let me quickly type. There's a spelling there for you for the caravanserais. Caravans is just a large group of people or merchants traveling together. You can carry more stuff if you got a lot of people and animals to carry it with you. And safety in numbers. That's the deal with caravans. More merchants in Islamic regions as a result of Muhammad being a former merchant. Yes and no. I mean, some of it's the Middle East is right in the middle of a whole bunch of trade networks, but also Islam was very favorable toward merchants. China was not particularly favorable toward merchants. Christianity went back and forth in terms of whether Christians were pro-merchants or anti-merchants, but Muslims tended to be pro-merchant all the way. So that is a factor, absolutely. Along with trade stuff, we also have to think about production. So technologies that increased agricultural production. And some of you have mentioned a bunch of those already that are a really big deal. So thinking about three-field system and horse collars in Western Europe, thinking about terracing in the Andes and in China, those kinds of things. somebody's asking the question about merchants in China. Merchants are distrusted in Confucian teachings because they seek to profit off of others. And so they violate some of the expectations of those 5 relationships. And it's not that China hates merchants, but that socially speaking, they were a lower social class. They were often distrusted by the people in China, as contrasted with the Islamic world, where merchants were held in high regard because of Muhammad's history as a merchant. Other factors that increase production, and this is production of all kinds of stuff, that as there's a greater demand for luxury goods, more and more people are going to enter those markets and they're going to produce more of those luxury goods. Some examples that the key concepts mention specifically, thinking about textiles. We didn't mention that. We did with silk, but other textiles, cotton textiles as well, porcelain. But also the demand for luxury goods also increased the overall wealth and production of some of these places. So for example, in China, we actually see iron and steel production increase in addition to luxury good production that increases. And the big kind of final thought with all of this is, who did this work, right? If we're making all of this stuff to trade and get fabulously wealthy, who's doing all of this work? And the trick of it is there's a diversity of labor systems. So we have free peasant agriculture in places like Western Europe. We have nomadic pastoralism, like the Mongols, craft production and guild organizations. So in cities, we see people banding together and creating organizations to protect people who do similar work. So there might be a blacksmith's guild or a potter's guild or things like that. Question about Southernization. Southernization is totally happening during this time period. And that's the idea that all of these inventions and developments are centered in particularly Southern Asia, so Southern China, Southeast Asia, and India, South Asia, and that they gradually spread into Europe. And that's why in this unit, the Europeans seem so backwards, because most of the major developments are happening in the global South, and they have not yet made it to Western Europe. Along with some of these free labor systems, though, we also have a variety of coerced labor systems. Coerced is one of those terms that means forced or unfree. So coerced labor systems include serfdom. Serfs, remember, are not slaves. They're free people, but they are, but they have restrictions on them. The mita system, the required labor on behalf of the government in the Inca Empire, as well as slaves. We see a variety of slave markets throughout the world, especially in Afro-Eurasia during this time period. Absolutely slavery during this time period. Not necessarily the slave trade that we think of in Unit 4 across the Atlantic, but slavery as a labor system for sure. It's worth noting, right, that even though we have this labor system that is hugely built on the backs of people who aren't making very much money, they weren't helpless. In particular, we see resistance of taxes that are too high by peasants in both China and places in Europe. And we see efforts by people, right, to make their lives better. I know for you East Coast folks, it is super duper late. So I am going to stop giving you new stuff. This is my endpoint in the slides anyway. You guys got through it with me. I will solve my tech problems and make sure we get done in an hour if we do another one of these a little bit later. West Coast folks, I'm going to hang around for a little bit longer if there's some questions that we can answer for people. Yeah, if you've got any kind of follow-up questions that you want to ask now, I'll stay on for maybe 3 or 4 more minutes and do that with you. East Coast people, if you need to go, go. Thank you for staying up with me tonight. You guys are awesome. All right. So as we're wrapping up here, I'm not seeing any fresh questions, so I'll just kind of give some final thoughts then maybe, which is that this particular, oh, you have a question in there? Sorry, Dylan, you totally have a question in there. To my knowledge, Is there anything required for the SAT 2 subject test for world history that isn't taught in traditional AP classes? I have no idea. I proctor the SAT 2 subject tests, and so not allowed to look at them. So I actually have no idea what's on them. I'm sorry. Kaylee's asking about the Song Dynasty economic revolution, and that's it's a lot of what we've been talking about, an increase in trade, an increase in technology that creates this huge growth in cities, this huge growth in prosperity for the Song Dynasty. So a lot of what you know about the Song Dynasty is part of this economic revolution. I think the Princeton Review gives it this big fancy title, but it's really that series of processes that you already know about the Song Dynasty and the economics in the Song Dynasty. If you think about technology, if you think about cities, those are a big deal. So we've got 3 things about Western European history. Can we discuss the schism, Charlemagne, and other Western European history? Short version, schism, Western Roman Catholic Church, Eastern Greek Orthodox Church. Charlemagne, he was a Frankish king. Other Western European history stuff. There's a lot there, but what's really important for you to know is what falls in with the key concepts. So look at the key concepts, and any key concept where you can come up with a Western European example, that's the stuff that you really need to know. Interactions in Unit 3. If you're thinking about interactions between humans and the environment, we talked about that a little ways back, and there's a lot going on. We've got technology, we've got cities growing or declining, we've got disease spreading along trade networks, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't know what you mean by interactions, but that's kind of the summary there. Causes and effects of the schism. Your textbook is going to have that, or your Princeton Review is going to have that. That's kind of beyond the scope of what I was talking about tonight. Remember, though, for the key concepts, you don't have to know everything about every religion. You need to know like big picture stuff. If you know a little bit about the schism, awesome. You don't have to know everything, really. All right, folks, it looks like the chat is continuing with some awesome side conversations. I'm going to take this one last question from Dylan, and then I'm going to sign off so that you all can actually go get some sleep. Yes, this AP teacher believes that you need to sleep. Did the Holy Roman Empire get established during this time? Yes, it did. Although, to quote John Green, it's not holy, it's not Roman, it's not really an empire. It's basically a conglomeration of little kingdoms in Central Europe. And yes, it gets established during this time, but it's not, and it would count as one of our new political structures that emerged during this time, but it's not one of the big players. So if you don't know a lot about the Holy Roman Empire, don't panic. Memorize the big players. You're going to be A-okay. All right, folks, have an awesome night. You are all wonderful and amazing and brilliant, and you're going to be fantastic. I'm going to see what I can schedule in terms of other live streams, because it looks like there were a lot of people on here tonight, and we'll try to get some times for you West Coast peeps. Have a good night, everybody.